Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to another virtual brown bag series. Today we have Sharon Rossmark with us from Women in Drones. Before we get started, I'll just give you a couple housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions, please submit them as we go along. We're going to hold questions till the end, but if you would submit them using the icon at the top right with the speech bubble with a question mark in it, that's our Q&A. We will get those out and we'll ask Ms. Rossmark a little bit later all your questions. The other thing is this is a full year program, virtual brown bags, every Wednesday and Friday. You can find the full schedule on our website at uta.edu/engineering. We're going to post the link to that in the chat, in the Q&A, so you'll be able to find that a little bit later. But let's get started with today's. Sharon Rossmark is the Chief Executive Officer of Women in Drones, the premier global platform for women who are disrupting, innovating, and shaping the future of the drone industry. She is also an FAA-certified drone pilot. Sharon is an international speaker, panelist, and moderator. She has taken the stage to share her passion for drones from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. to the World of Drones Congress in Brisbane, Australia. Under the Women in Drones banner, the company has 7 brands, including Drone Flight Services, specializing in beta testing for new products, and beach erosion inspections, to a Kids with Drones STEM initiative and a newly launched Women in Drones network across Africa. Sharon is the co-author of several books introducing young children to drones. Most of the characters in the books are girls, which is a purposeful, important part of her commitment to engaging more girls in STEM and aviation. She serves in an advisory capacity for several drone-related boards and advisory councils in the US and Canada. And with that, I will turn it over to Sharon. Sharon, thanks for being with us today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. And as you said, I love having the opportunity to share my passion for drones. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about drones in terms of the business applications, how it fits into aviation, and then the overall opportunities within drones, not only from a career standpoint, but also what's coming next. Most of it is sooner rather than later, which may be a surprise to a lot of people. So as Jeremy just said, we're a global platform operating under 7 different brands, and about 21 countries do we have our network members represented. Most people think of drones from a selfie standpoint, which means, they may be buying drones for recreational purposes, and they really get a kick out of using that fancy camera in the air to take pictures as a selfie or with friends. And I can say that regardless of how long drones have been around now, we still have the concern about privacy. That's probably the number one complaint or concern that's been voiced by consumers in our experience. However, most people are familiar with military drones. They may not be familiar with the size of the drone, which is why I like this particular picture, because you can see based on the size of an individual or people what the military drones look like. But let's get to the business side of this. So drones present a unique opportunity in terms of it's a convergence of technology, business, and aviation. And while we won't have a chance to spend any time today on the education component, that's really going to be a key component of future jobs, as well as fueling that pipeline with today's students into the world of the aviation and drones. Drones themselves fit into what we are calling the 4th industrial revolution of disruptive technologies. And as you can see what's pictured there, drones play an important aspect in all 4 of those quadrants in terms of its capabilities. The growth opportunity with drones continue to evolve, and the numbers just keep keep growing, as well as the number of industries. And we're going to show you a number of examples today of industries that have incorporated drones, but it's all being driven primarily by the opportunities within the business sectors. From an aviation standpoint, I took this particular slide from planefinder.net as of just yesterday afternoon. And at the time, you'll see over here on the left, this part of the globe, that's the United States. And at that time, it was about 8,000 planes in the air across the United States. And believe it or not, most people don't realize this, but drones actually are a major component and and is the fastest growing sector within aviation. To that point, to date, there have been almost 900,000 drones registered. Because they are aircraft, they must be registered with the FAA, and that is both from a commercial perspective and recreational perspective. The other number I'll point out on the page here is that we're almost at 250,000 remote pilots. Remote pilots are drone pilots. We're called remote pilots by the FAA because we are remote from our aircraft versus manned aviation. So in terms of where drones fit in, I like this particular slide because whether you're an adult or whether you're a child, it helps to depict that drones are flying in the same national airspace as any other aircraft. So whether it's a passenger plane, a hot air balloon, or even a helicopter, we're all governed by the same rules and regulation, because once you lift off the ground, you are flying in a national airspace. And so regardless if you're flying recreationally for fun or if you are flying for commercial purposes, you must follow the same rules and guidelines as all other aircraft flying in the national airspace. In fact, just to kind of give you some insights into that, 95% of what affects manned aircraft operations also affects drones. And I'm going to talk about UAS, that's unmanned aircraft systems, here in a few minutes. But what's important to understand, again, is that flying in the national airspace, we have to follow the same rules of the FAA as manned passenger aircrafts do. And the only differences, again, is that the pilot, in the case of drones, is remote from the aircraft itself. So that's why we call remote pilots, but we are governed by the same rules and regulation presented by the FAA. So let's talk about drones. Most people don't know that there are actually two types of aerial drones. Now, there are a variety of drones because there are underwater drones. Today, we're going to focus on aerial drones, but there's fixed wing. Fixed wing meaning, as you can see here in the picture on the left, that it is launched. So it's not a vertical takeoff aircraft. And this is in terms of its battery life or however it's fueled, is substantially longer than the rotary wing, and I'll go to those. So these are rotary. On the left is a very small one that fits literally in the palm of your hand. That's called a quadcopter because it has 4 propellers. And on the right, you have what's called an octocopter. Again, it's a larger one, and because it's carrying something, I'm going to talk about these payloads. This may be the type of drone you may see that is used for developing movies or carrying much heavier payloads. So let's talk about some terminology that you're going to see on my slides. As you've already seen, there are several ways that drones are, several different names that drones are called. So they're drones, but they're also called UAS, unmanned aerial systems. They're also called UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, and they're also called SUAVs, small unmanned aerial vehicles. So what is the difference? The biggest difference is this center one, UAV, the middle one here, that is just the aircraft itself. So that's just the vehicle. This top one is the system. So it includes the drone and any other elements that's required to operate the drone. So whether you're talking a screen or a controller, that is the entire system. And small unmanned aircraft is just based on the size. So the smaller ones like the previously on the page or even on this page, but you can see here, but they all fall into this category, even if they're fit in the palm of your hand, small one like that, or a much larger one like in the top left-hand corner. But again, the overall category is considered drones. So let's talk about the business of drones. I'm going to pop up let's put it that way, a lot of circles here that actually references various industries that have started to incorporate drones into their processes. There might be quite a few that are surprising to you here, and I'm actually going to walk you through many of these in terms of some examples. But generally, if you have any questions about any of these fields after we're done, feel free to ask questions about them. So let's talk about how we make this happen. So first of all, the aircraft itself, in this case, the drone that you see here, It's just a tool to actually carry what's called a payload, which is in general terms is a camera. Most people think of a payload as a camera, but it can carry any number of sensors or different types of sensors or equipment. And we're going to walk through some of those examples. But herein lies what really makes the drones functional in terms of, as I go back to this slide, in its application to so many different industries. And then in particular, in terms of applications, I wanted to point out a few to you. So the biggest categories for drones are inspections, survey, and deliveries. And in particular, inspections, crops and infrastructure. Crops, because we're seeing a growing number of applications as it's being used in agriculture. And I wanted to point out infrastructure because, as you know, right now, our legislators in Washington are debating infrastructure dollars. And we see that, those of us in the drone industry see that as a key element of not only growth, but then also a role that we're going to be able to play once those infrastructure dollars are allocated out to the states. And I'm going to give you some examples of what's needed or what's required by that. Another growing application is search and rescue. Any given day on the news, you may hear about either a lost child or a missing person or wandering a patient due to Alzheimer's, or even a convict or criminal that they're looking for in the public space. And search and rescue, public safety officials are using drones for search and rescue operations. So let's talk about some of those applications. So here's an example of a payload used for agriculture where they're spraying crops. You can also change this payload and then they would actually be able to detect the health of the plants. And so you can imagine a farmer after a significant storm where maybe some of their crops have been damaged or are totally lost. You could send up a drone to do a quick inspection of the entire field. So this is a perfect example of using the application in agriculture. One that you may not be familiar with is that drones have been used in fashion shows. So this was pre-pandemic. And in this particular case, this was in Italy. One of the major handbag designers in Italy actually introduced their new handbag line using drones. So they actually brought the drones out on a catwalk. And if you Google this, drones and fashion show or drones and handbags, video of this will come up, and it's quite entertaining. I like to use it particularly for kids to show that you don't have to be a scientist necessarily to really understand the applicability in a given field. Here's another one that a lot of people may not be familiar with unless you've been in an area that's been hit by a disaster. And this one's called a flying cow. And a flying cow stands for cellular on wings. It has been introduced over the last several years in remote areas or in areas where citizens or people have been cut off from due to storms. They've been cut off from civilization due to bridges being, roads being washed out. The cellular companies will go in right away and put up these cellular cows in an effort to at least reach people, those that can still have power for their phones. And so they have become quite useful in disaster situations. And then there's racing, growing in popularity. Many times on any given weekend, you may see drone racing activities on TV. In fact, there's one example that I like is a 16-year-old out of England who won $250,000 a few years ago in a global racing contest. And then there is this young lady down here in the middle on the lower as well as up here in the top, 10-year-old. Who beat out not only a teenager, but an adult in an international drone racing event in the women's females category. So you can see that, when I saw this, I said, so what has your 10-year-old been doing lately, to win $8,000 first place, beating out an adult and a teenager. Another example is emergency relief. We're starting to see growing examples of a number of companies that are getting into testing and delivery of emergency supplies via drone. And then, of course, I used this example a few minutes ago with search and rescue. Again, here's an example of a payload of a drone being able to drop life preservers down into the water. I recently talked with a fire and rescue department that's here in the Chicagoland area, and they had said that it's helpful to have drones because on any given day, someone that may be jogging down Lake Michigan and they see what they think may be someone in the water, and someone calls 911. That department has to utilize resources to get down to the water and get someone out there. Well, if their first response out to the water can be a drone, it can quickly assess, one, if it is a person, and two, their condition. So you can see how that can accelerate the rescue opportunities for saving lives. Many of you may be familiar with the drones that were used, or may not be familiar that drones were used at the fire at Notre Dame a couple of years ago. And I particularly like this picture because one of the lead drone pilots was a female. But in this case, drones were used to help the firefighters understand what was the condition of the roof at the time, as well as what were the hot spots. And that is done by adding a payload, and that's what this picture does. This is showing internal, this is not the Notre Dame fire, but this is showing when you add a payload to a drone that you can, a thermal payload, which is a thermal camera to a drone, it allows the firefighters to see the hot spots. And so therefore they would not send someone in or may revise their strategy for how they're going to attack that fire. Another application that may not be familiar is growing use of using drones for wildlife conservation. An example I like to use is in Africa, it is a growing number of drones are being used, particularly to thwart not only poachers, but then also keep track of wildlife, particularly since they can spread out quite quickly. And here's an example of a drone flying and hovering over elephants. One of the things, though, that is a growing study is understanding the impact of drones, primarily the noise, on animals. So what they're starting to understand is how far away you need to stay away because of the sensitivity to the animals to drones. Another one that usually gets a giggle when I'm presenting this is about whale snot. So it's called a snot bot, and that's when you attach a petri dish to a drone. And traditionally, what has been done is that they would go out to find whales within a boat and then have to shoot them with some type of mechanism to implant a needle of some sort to capture fluids from the animal. This way, you're not disrupting the animal or harming the animal in any way. They use a snot bot, which is a drone, petri dish attached to a drone, and then it captures, once the whale blows the snot, they fly the drone over, it captures it, and then the scientists can take that back to the laboratory and take a look and determine whale health by looking at that information. Another way is drones are being used to help spot sharks. This is an increasing problem in warm weather areas where, as you all probably have heard, there's recent stories from this past summer of a number of people being attacked and a number of people being saved because of use of drones and being able to identify sharks in the water. Now, here's something that you may not be aware of is use of drones for inspections. And here's a perfect example of infrastructure dollars that may be coming down, that increasingly number of industries can use drones rather than human lives to necessarily do some initial inspection. So the picture on the right, you can see these workers have had to go up inside of the wind turbine and then climb up and out to inspect. Whereas if you use a drone, you can do some initial inspections, determine what appears to be the damage and assess it, and then send workers up to do the work. And the reason why I like this particular slide from a Texas standpoint is that Texas actually has one of the largest number of wind turbines in the country. And because of the requirements for inspections, you can see that with Texas, Iowa, and Oklahoma, who are the leaders in the number of wind turbines, the applicability here for not only saving money, but then also saving lives. And here's an example of what it will look like from a drone perspective of being able to identify damage done to a wind turbine versus an individual who, I can't even imagine how they would even get this view otherwise, but I know that they have to climb up and then out in order to get a aerial view from their perspective. But this way you can send a drone and look much more closely for the damage. Bridge inspections is another opportunity for infrastructure funds as they come down from our legislators. There are over 600,000 bridges in the United States. And once again, Texas is at the top of the list, Texas, Ohio, and Illinois, in terms of the growing number of aging bridges. And in this case, they have these 3 states are leading the country in terms of the number of bridges. And bridges are required to be inspected every 2 years. And again, 2 pictures here depict for you how how bridges have been traditionally inspected. On the case on the left, you see a woman who is having to parallel down from the side of a bridge. And then over here, you can see on the right, you can see a worker. And I can't even imagine, my heart would just drop having to be in that position, just thinking about the weight of that and the wind and the implications for that. But again, this is how it's traditionally done. And now with using drones, you can see that you can send drones into these tight places, and they have super great capability in terms of the cameras, and they can see some of the damaged areas right there without having to send someone in there. And then you can determine how you're going to approach the repair work. Another growing area for use of drones is in forestry. As you all know, there's been thousands of acres of land destroyed due to fires, and they're testing and utilizing drones to replant some of this. And you can use drones to plant about 25% faster, if not even more, than using human hands to go out and plant this. I think they're looking for the effectiveness right now because this is going to be a long-term strategy, but we are seeing an increased number of drones being used for this capability. Cattle ranching is another one. Traditionally, drones have been used most recently from a standpoint of either helping to herd cattle, which, dogs are often used for that, as well as ranchers on horseback, but they can also use drones to help keep track of the cattle in case they wander off, as well as count them. Here's a roof inspection. This is actually my home. I like to use this example. So this is a story of my story versus my husband's story. We have the same story in the sense that we needed to have our gutters clean, and we hired someone to come in to clean the gutters. I was not home the day that they came out. My husband was. And when I came home, I asked him, how did it go? And he said it went fine, that they were, very quick in completing the task. So I decided to go outside and put my drone up. And I actually found several places, and here's an example of 2 places on our roof that I found that they did not replace all of the sections of the gutter covers, as well as in some sections, they did not properly replace them by tucking the gutter covers underneath the shingles. So my side of the story versus my husband's side, I sent him the pictures, and he had to contact the roofer or have him contact the company and mention to them that they missed several sections, and they were very apologetic, and they came back a couple of days later. And the gentleman asked my husband, he goes, so how did you even know that we missed some spots? And he said, my wife came home and put up her drone. Doesn't your wife do that? So therein lies, even if you have a drone for personal use, where it might be beneficial for you to use for checking. And we have done this. This happened a couple of years ago, and we've done it every year ever since, particularly after storms. Another growing application for drones is drone swarms. You may have seen this, whether it's at the Super Bowl or any the Olympics even, where drones are starting to be utilized for incorporating them into light shows and or even fireworks. In fact, here's another example of a figure that was put up, and here's one that was used at the premiere of Wonder Woman. So you can see that drones are starting to have numerous applications across the spectrum. Warehousing is another example where, if you can imagine, in the past, and I say in the past because this is a growing application where you've got boxes stacked high up in ceilings and warehouses. Now they're just attaching, again, the capability for the drones to just scan. The software can just scan the barcodes and do all of that accounting of content and goods that are in a warehouse. Railway inspections is another one. There are millions of miles of railroad tracks in this country, and railroad companies are starting to utilize drones for inspecting those tracks. And similar to other infrastructure, they do have a routine schedule that they must follow. You can imagine after the most recent Amtrak train disaster that they've got to go back and check those miles and miles of railroads along the way. And so drones can quickly start that assessment process for them. Cinematography, I just mentioned the Wonder Woman movie. It's hard today in 2021 to find a movie that is not utilizing drones in some capacity. And in this particular case, you can see where I've got this dashed line around. That is a very expensive camera. In fact, this is a perfect example where the camera is probably costing even 10 times what the drone itself covers. And this is a very large drone. It's called a heavy lift drone. Construction is another growing area where drones are being utilized for business. And now I'd like to segue to talking about drones in the future. And while I'm going to talk about them in the future, some of these applications have most recently been accelerated because of the pandemic in terms of not only the testing, but their actual use. So future, but not so distant future. They're actually a lot sooner than you may think. So one of the questions a lot of people may ask is, well, okay, Sharon, you mentioned that you're going to have all of these aircraft in the air, drones are going to be incorporated. How is that going to work? When is all this going to happen? We got package delivery, you got police, you've got cargo, you've got passenger planes. How is this going to work? So here's a picture, a depiction of an idea or concept that is well underway. This one was developed by Amazon, so I like it because of its simplicity. But if you think about lanes on the road, and I know here in Chicago, we've got bike lanes, we've got bus lanes, we've got car lanes. And, you know, you've got to make sure that you're in the right lane when you go to make a right turn or left turn, that you're not impeding in the lane of one of the other type of transportation modes. Well, the same thing is going to need to happen in the sky. We're going to need to have lanes in the sky. So you're going to have elevations of where certain type of aircraft can fly. And today the rules are for drones is that we can't fly any higher than 400 feet. And that's in general terms. There are some exceptions to that. But if you think about it, if you maintain drones at 400 feet and then maybe helicopters and some other type of aircraft at 500 feet and then passenger planes above that, that starts that whole concept of lanes in the sky. We're already operating like that in some aspects, but then you've got those areas where you do crossover because you have planes that are taking off, helicopters that are taking off, and so they have to pass through that 400 feet level. So those are all mechanisms that will help us further explore creating these lanes in the sky. So let's talk about package delivery. It was just a few years ago when everybody was all the rage when Amazon is saying, oh, we're going to have Prime Air and we're going to start delivering your packages. Well, in reality, there are a number of companies that's already testing this. Pre-pandemic, McDonald's teamed up with Uber in Southern California to start testing delivering your McDonald's via drone. Walgreens and FedEx tested drone delivery and has accelerated that in the pandemic. In fact, there were a number of senior communities in the early days of the pandemic where, in order to make sure that they were receiving their medications, that they were starting that drone delivery process. And now it has become kind of a staple in some parts of the country. So it's beyond testing. It's still limited, but they are doing that. And then UPS is also teamed up with CVS. So you can see that pretty much everybody's getting into the mix. And then earlier I showed you some typical aircraft. Well, here's one by UPS that they initially designed for their testing, and I think they have since even evolved it there. And this is their chief pilot, by the way. But you can see that they have crafted something, because if you're talking about delivering medications, you're talking a much smaller piece. If you're talking delivering much larger packages, then obviously the size is going to go up. And then UPS being one of the leaders in logistics, you can imagine as you start talking about delivering more personal items or larger items, that they can then utilize their logistics system to really integrate drones into the overall process for package delivery. Emergency organ delivery. There are a number of companies now that have started testing with hospitals for emergency organ delivery. And in fact, I think the very first one was out on the East Coast, where they had a patient that they needed to, that was in an emergency situation, did not survive. They were able to harvest those organs and move them across campus, which would normally have taken after the completion, based on the distance. They said anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes, where in this case, they were able to cut the time well in half and deliver those organs and save someone's life. A growing number of golf courses have started testing using drone delivery right there on the golf course. So rather than having to stop at the back on the front nine to place your order, you can now place your order via cell and they can deliver your package to you. Again, that's a very contained space, but those are all realistic opportunities as well as realistic applications that are happening today. So let's talk about something that's in the future, but is in many ways, again, well underway in terms of its development, and that's advanced air mobility. I like to think of it as the Jetsons. For those of us old enough to remember the Jetsons, you're talking about basically passenger drones. And here's 3 depictions of pictures of actual drones that are been developed. In fact, the one over here on the left, I actually had an opportunity to physically sit in that one. That one was at the CES, Consumer Electronics Show, a couple of years ago. And it is actually pretty cool. And there's no mechanism in there to take control, which in some ways is a little frightening. But, you know, when I think about sitting in Chicago traffic or any of the major cities that's got bumper to bumper traffic, it may be pretty cool to be able to go to a central place other than an airport and catch one of these and take it to my next location. Uber, who's recently sold that division, but they have developed an aircraft, as well as Bell, and right there in Texas. They also are a leader in this space. So what are we seeing in terms of careers? There's a host. If you're a lawyer, if you're in marketing, if you're in sales, all of those opportunities are obviously careers within the drone industry. But I thought I would share with you probably the top 5 that we're seeing. I think the engineers piece is pretty obvious. I can't say a week goes by when I don't hear from someone saying, hey, we're looking for a specific type of engineer with this background. So software engineers, mechanical engineers, if you're out there, there's an opportunity, a demand for your position in the industry. Drone pilots. While drones like vehicles are becoming more and more autonomous down the line, right now there's a huge need. And once these infrastructure dollars come down, I can imagine that demand is going to quickly grow. Obviously, business development, and then educators. And the reason why educators, we're starting to see growth there, is because of that pipeline. And that pipeline starts as young as kindergarten. So it's a matter of starting to help our educators get comfortable with this technology in the STEM and aviation field so that they can encourage and start bringing more young people into this industry. To give you a feel for the salaries, and this is again current, at the beginning level, I would say that it's really based on your skill set. And then if you have vertical specialty, what is a vertical specialty? So if you are, if you work for a utility company and you're already doing inspection of their utility lines, or an oil company, you have a specialty. Or insurance adjuster, that's another one. Insurance companies are heavily utilizing drones and not having to send their insurance adjusters up on roofs. So it could be a part-time as little as $25,000 and upwards of $175,000. I can tell you that where it says minimum of 50 hours, in the last year since the pandemic, more and more companies are really starting to ask for a minimum of 100 hours of flight time. So they want that more, what we call stick skill experience. So someone who is used to and comfortable flying a drone with at least 100 hours. And then multi-copter, we talked about this earlier, you know, you've got your fixed wing, you've got your rotary wing, and then within that, you've got the different sizes. Multi-copter experience is invaluable. And then again, your specialty certifications. So let's talk about the need for remote pilots. So in 2016 is the first year, and actually I believe it was August of 2016 is when the FAA first started offering the certification for remote pilots, which means you are a commercial pilot. I am a commercial remote pilot or commercial drone pilot. We started offering it, or FAA started offering it in 2016, and that into that first year from August to December, over 20,000 people had taken the test. Fast forward to 2020, end of 2020, so December of this past year, they had just exceeded 206, and as of about a month ago, that number is approaching 250,000. So to one of my opening statements, this is the fastest growing sector within aviation, and you can see the large leaps and bounds of the number of pilots who have become certified through the FAA. As well as with any other sector within aviation, there's still a need for more women. In 2016, there were only barely 800 women that received their certification. However, in 5 short years, it's already jumped to almost 15,000. Now, I want to give you a sense for how fast that has grown. These 3 categories here. So you've got your drone pilots, again, remote pilots. You've got your women commercial pilots. Those are women who fly manned aircraft and have a commercial license. And then you've got your women pilots who are air transport pilots. Think of air transport pilots as your passenger planes, like your major carriers, United, American, Delta, and so forth. In the country, in the United States, as of the year in 2020, there were only 7,500 women that were air transport pilots. And then you've got your commercial pilots. There were 7,700. Now we're at 2020, and we have almost double the number of women pilots on that site. So it, again, is the fastest growing sector. One reason that is of value, that this is a value, is that this is a great entry into the overall aviation careers. So another pathway into manned aviation. And then the bottom portion of this slide simply depicts the age group. And I can tell you over the last couple of years since we've been tracking this, as it says very bottom here, the average age is about 38 in terms of the average woman. The male side of this is just slightly higher, but that has started coming down. It was mid 40s previously. And what we're finding is that we're starting to see more younger people come into the industry. Again, of the year-end pilots of 2020, 92%, 93% are men, 7% are women. So huge opportunity to bring more women into the aviation sector. And since we're talking to University of Texas at Arlington, I thought I'd put this in here. I think Texas is second or third in terms of the number of women who are remote pilots certified by the FAA, which is 1,200. I think Florida and California are just slightly ahead. And that concludes my presentation. I've put my information up there. Feel free to reach out in any of our formats online and or even by email. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Great. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation today. Again, for our people that are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A section at this point. Sharon, I wonder if you could tell me what are you most excited about in terms of, where drones are going and what the future looks like in drones for women, for just in general, however you want to talk about it. But what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited, and again, this is for everyone. It's not just women. Overall, the opportunities and the careers, the pipeline for STEM and aviation leading into this field is unbelievable. And then in terms of actual development is probably the passenger drones. I would say that we're probably 7 to 10 years out on the early side, but the fact that you've got major organizations, corporations who have actually built drones, and there are other countries in other parts of the globe that are already starting to say that they're going to start testing this, just tells me that, literally sky's the limit.
And what does that pipeline look like? You've talked about a whole bunch of stuff here, but we're a university, obviously, but I saw, 16-year-old was in one of your graphics and stuff like that. So how does that pipeline work if somebody wants to get into this field?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Actually, here in the States, someone as young as 16 can actually secure a remote pilot's license from the FAA. So we know any number of high school students and college students who have started their own business, primarily in what we call the low-hanging fruit in terms of attracting opportunities is for going after real estate. They started their own business, but the pipeline actually starts as young as kindergarten. You have to start getting kids interested in STEM and in aviation that early.
Fantastic. I'll give you a chance while we wait to see if somebody else has any questions to maybe tell us a little bit about Women in Drones. Tell us about your company a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. So as I mentioned, we are a global organization. We were started 5 years ago, and in 5 years, we now have women as well as men. I would say that we are about 70% women, 30% men, and it continues to grow. We had huge growth during the pandemic because I think they being people in general in the industry, were looking for opportunities to connect, and we provided that through our online networking events. But we're about elevating and promoting the opportunities for women in the industry. As you can see by the numbers I showed there in the last few slides, there's a huge opportunity to grow the number of women in the industry.
Fantastic. And then I have one more question for you for right now. You talked about like the flight levels and like drone deliveries, and there was like the streets and stuff like that. So who is the one or who's going to be determining what those different levels are? Who's in charge of all that? And then who's going to be in charge of enforcement and training and telling people that kind of thing is out there?
The FAA owns all of that. Once you lift the drone or anything up off the ground, from an aircraft standpoint, that's owned by the FAA. So they're making the rules, the regulation. I actually have the fortune of sitting on a working committee right now. It's called BV Law, so it's beyond visual line of sight, because to really extend and really dive into driving the economy, we're going to need to be able to be able to see the drone beyond visual line of sight, which is a new skill set that we're going to also need to further train and educate to based on what you just said. So that capability, all of that is owned. The infrastructure, the regulation is owned by the FAA.
And what about outside the U.S., like in the rest of the world, as this technology spreads? How does it all kind of integrate? Because obviously the FAA is in charge of us, but there are international rules for like powered flight. What about drones? How is this going to spread throughout the world?
I couldn't have asked you to ask me a better question. I just came back from Canada a few weeks ago to secure my Canadian remote pilot license there. Similar to flying manned aircraft, you have some similarities, but there are some obvious differences, particularly when you're learning their method and their approach. But just as if you were flying an aircraft from the United States into Canada, there are quite a bit of some similarities. But I would say that the biggest difference between us and Canada, as well as some other countries, Australia, South Africa, and even some of the European countries, is that they offer what's called a flight practical, which is the reason why I had to physically go to Canada, whereas here in the United States, they don't require a flight practical. So a flight test, it's primarily a written test. But then in order to really develop and secure a job or a career, you really need to have the developed skills. But to answer your question, there's quite a number of similarities. They are all integrated in terms of working unions to ensure that there's an understanding of the guidelines.
Fantastic. Really, really exciting topic. So many really interesting possibilities about what can come with unmanned flight and everything like that. So Sharon Rossmark of Women in Drones, we really appreciate your time today. Just checking, I don't see any other questions, so we'll let you go. But again, thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing your name in the news and seeing everything we can see about drones coming up.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jeremy.
Thanks.